Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be talking about something that's kind of been on my mind as I see a lot of influx in new players coming into the game and they're asking kind of similar questions. The big question that they all ask is, I'm new to Digimon, where do I start? So this video is going to help try to answer that question the best I can in the context of what you should be doing as a brand new player in order to be able to get yourself to play the game. Granted, everyone has their own favorite Digimon or favorite card style or gameplay, and I get that, but sometimes you just need to learn the basics and get your feet wet before you dive into something more specific, especially if it's going to be a little bit more costly, because not everything in the game is super cheap, but the game as a whole, for the most part, is relatively affordable. Outside of just a small handful of cards, which we could find replacements for the most part. Some of them we can't, but I digress. But in terms of it being a brand new player, where do you start? So the best place to start is, well, with buying product to be able to get the cards to be able to play the game. And usually you want to go with some of the newest product because that's what's going to be more available, and that's going to be what a lot of people are going to be playing and leaning into, especially with the new starter decks. Starter decks is a very fantastic place to start because, well, they literally are giving you a deck and then you just buy cards from a specific set or sets in order to add it to that deck to be able to make it as competitively viable as you possibly can. Some do a better job at others, and the two that I'm going to be highlighting is going to be Starter Deck 9 and Starter Deck 7. So that's going to be the Gallantmon Starter Deck, and that's going to be the Imperialdramon Starter Deck. So I think those are the two best starter decks if you're just getting into the game to pick up and play, and there is a starter deck rule where you're going to want 2 copies of any given starter deck, so that way you have a full playset of all of the cards in said starter decks. But as far as my interpretation on why I think these are the 2 best starter decks, it's because, well, they have the most support, they're relatively easy to play, and they have some really strong gameplay, and their upgrades are cheap and affordable for the most part. I think even though All Force is a pretty decent deck, it does have some really good blue staples. As a deck itself, it isn't necessarily super strong compared to the other 2 that I'm going to be highlighting. And in terms of Parallel World Tacticians, I also think that is a good starter deck, but it's a little bit more complicated in order to play and play well, and it's really, really expensive in order to be able to upgrade it to be able to have it be competitively viable. So I think that the Gallantmon and Imperial starter decks are just a little bit better of an entry point. And to kind of show this off, I have a couple of example decks that I want to go over. I'm not going to go too deep into these decks. These decks are more just here for the sake of the example, that even if you are limiting yourself and you do have a limited card pool, you could still build a relatively powerful deck to be able to experience the game and to be able to compete. Is it going to be hyper tier 1 meta competitive? Is it going to win you a whole bunch of events? Probably not. It's still trying to let you have as fun of an experience as you possibly can. So in terms of the overall card pool that this deck is working with, I limited myself to A, the Gallantmon starter deck, B, BT8, which is the latest mainline booster, and C, the latest extra booster, which is going to be EX2. So just off of that kind of a card pool, we could still build something relatively functional and relatively powerful to be able to experience the game and not get completely blown out of the water. Now, obviously, you still have to learn how to play the deck and figure out what the deck is trying to do in order to optimize your plays and have a higher success rate with the deck as a whole. And then when you feel comfortable, you could upgrade it and iterate it in various different ways to be able to experience deck building and deck customization. And the deck has a whole bunch of different ways that we could customize it depending on the different types of support cards that you want to put into the deck. And this deck is going to be a decent deck to invest in for the future because looking ahead at BT9, we do get Gallantmon support in the form of Gallantmon X Antibody. So just having a good foundation deck that could take you through multiple different sets while still being effective and powerful even on a budget just makes this a very ideal deck. And in terms of what Gammamon is trying to do as a whole, he is kind of a aggro control style of deck where he wants to delete the opponent's Digimon for various different benefits, and he wants to also hit as hard as he possibly can, not only boosting what damage he could do, but his DP as well, to be able to have a higher chance of surviving the security checks that he's going to be eventually taking. And the deck is going to be centered around the use of Takato, because Takato is a card that has some really good synergies with our Gallantmons, allowing us to be able to extend some of our plays in various different ways, depending on what the current state of our field is. And Imperialdramon is in that same style of vein, where you don't necessarily need a whole lot outside of the starter deck in order to make it a very efficient and very powerful deck. So just trying to limit yourself as much as possible, the majority of the cards are going to be coming from the starter deck and BT8 in order to have a good foundation going, and then you're going to subsidize that with a little bit of cards from some various other sets, but some of the more important cards aren't necessarily super expensive, which is always nice because you could easily get those cards to be able to have a functional and very powerful deck. And essentially what Imperialdramon is trying to do is take advantage of the DNA Digivolution mechanic to be able to reset your Digimon and continue the aggression. So it's just another really good, easy entry deck that's going to be taking a more aggressive side, where you have lots of different lines of play and various different forms of aggression depending on what you're able to line up and the types of cards you're going to be running inside of the deck. And as far as the future-proofing of the deck, you could transition the deck to be a little bit more armor-focused, which is what is going to be coming out in BT9, and what was the main focus of BT8, on top of setting up and being able to line up your DNA Digivolution a little bit easier. But regardless, it's still just going to be another very powerful deck that's going to last a couple of sets, making it another really good, solid investment with a whole bunch of different upgrade paths, again, depending on the type of direction and cards and support you want to put into the deck. And then if you wanted to invest in sets, I think that right now EX2 is a really good set to think about buying into, just because not only do we know that a lot of the cards are going to be getting support in later sets, like in BT9 and in BT10, but you have one of the first ever self-inclusive decks that you could be making out of the set. So the way Digimon sets are designed is most of the time you're not actually able to take the cards in the set and be able to make a deck out of. But with EX2, you actually do get the ability to do that in the form of D-Reapers. So even though in this example right here, D-Reapers is utilizing cards from various other sets in terms of its support package, you don't necessarily have to run a support package, and if you want, you could just run straight up D-Reapers, and it's still going to be a very powerful and effective deck. But I do think that the customization and flexibility of D-Reapers just allows you to be able to experiment in various different ways with a whole bunch of different colors to be able to find a combination of cards that you feel really comfortable and happy with as a player. So it still has room for customization and exploration in terms of how you could build and approach the deck. And the deck is a super cheap and affordable deck just because everything in the deck for the most part is rare and below, and with extra boosters having a more generous pull ratio than normal boosters, you only need about 2 to 3 boosters in order to build the deck, or if you just want to buy the singles, it shouldn't cost you that much in order to be able to have a fully functional deck with very little overall investment just to be able to experience the game. Even though I think D-Reapers is playing the game a little bit differently than most other Digimon decks, it's still going to be a very fun and effective deck that you can make on a budget. And if you're really worried about being price-walled out of the game, I really wouldn't be, considering, like I stated before, the majority of the game is super affordable. The majority of the money in the game is going to be in alt art cards and event promos, or just promos in general sometimes, and outside of those cards and specific rares and below, for the most part, the game is super affordable. As we can see here, just scrolling through, these are the SRs. The most expensive base rare SR is going to be Magna Angemon, which it's currently only used in a total of 1 to 2 decks. And if you're not playing those decks, then, well, you don't need to spend the money on that type of card, even though he is just a really good card in general. And that type of sentiment is seen through a lot of the SRs, where sometimes they are more desirable because of the type of deck that they're in, and sometimes if they're not played at all, or they're only in a very niche deck that not a lot of people are playing, then the card is going to be super cold, and then it's going to make the deck more affordable as a result. And then I know I made a video discussing market trends in terms of when to figure out is a good time to be able to buy a card. Just using WarGrowlmon as an example, he is now a really expensive card, but at one point he actually really wasn't, only valuing about $5 versus the around 20 he currently is now. This goes into the concept of looking ahead and looking at Japanese spoilers and Japanese results and seeing what cards are going to be coming down the pipeline in order to figure out what kind of cards you should be picking up now that are going to be supporting the cards that we're going to be getting later. So as we get closer and closer to a set's release, that's usually when the card is going to go up and up and up in price, and usually the first spike is when a card is announced is going to be getting some support. So we know that with WarGrowlmon here, he's going to be a really good card to include with the WarGrowlmon X antibody line that we're going to be getting in BT9, which again caused him to spike up in price because now people are buying up the card in anticipation for that deck. But before, he wasn't seeing a whole lot of play, so his price was a lot cheaper than what it currently is now. And outside of those types of market trends, we still do have our generic staple cards that are seen in a wide variety of decks, and as a result are part of the select few cards that are actually going to be holding a slightly higher price tag. But we actually do have and are getting some smart substitutions to be able to mitigate the cost of what it takes to be able to play the game. So as an example here, we have Kamiya, which is going to be one of the best red tamers that we currently have access to, and as a result, he does have a slightly higher price tag. But in BT8, we did get another really solid tamer to help act as a replacement for Tai to be able to utilize in various decks to help lower the cost of the deck and still have a functionally similar card to what Tai is trying to do. Even though it's not exactly the same, it's going to be close enough for a lot of decks to want to use as a good substitution. And we could see this on some various other tamers as well, like TK here from Special Booster 1.0. He's another really good solid yellow tamer that we do have a functional replacement for. So even though Kari Kamiya from BT8 isn't going to be doing exactly the same thing, TK is a good consistency tool on top of being a memory fixing tamer. Kari is a good card to just act as a good yellow memory fixing tamer to at least get that part of the ability while having her own line of support and ways that we could utilize the card that might make her even better than TK in some cases. And then blue, we do have another example of this with Davis that could easily be replaced with BT08 TK, which is why I think BT08 is just such a good set to start thinking about getting into the game, because not only is it helping a lot of good starter decks, but it's also giving some functionally similar cards to some of the other cards that we already had in the game to be able to have very similar style of effects that allows us to have some good replacements for those types of cards. Even though sometimes they're not always going to be better than what they're trying to replace, it still gives you access to the types of abilities that we're looking for to be able to have a functional deck. But part of it getting into any TCG isn't necessarily what you should be getting first. It's generally looking at what you want to play and kind of line yourself up best with that. What I recommended is completely fine if you're just starting into the game, but we have a whole bunch of different colors that do play kind of differently from one another and focus on various different things. So red is a color where its deletion is based on the opponent's DP, while it's trying to line up one really big and strong hit. Then you have something like blue, where it does have lots of good consistency in terms of drawing and searching, but its control options are all bounce and stun based, on top of the fact that it generally likes to attack a lot of times, multi-swinging with a single Digimon. Then on top of that, we have yellow, which its control is via DP reduction usually. It is actually playing a little bit with putting cards into the opponent's security, but those kind of cards are far and few in between, and the vast majority of its control is DP reduction. But yellow is a color all about security management and manipulation to try to put yourself in particular ranges to gain various different benefits depending on the types of cards that you're going to be playing with. then you do have something like green, where its control options are about suspending the opponent's Digimon down and either keeping it suspended or suspending it to be able to be attacked into for various different benefits, with its general theme being about cheap evolution. And then we have purple, which is deleting the opponent's cards most of the time via level or card state. So whether it's suspended or unsuspended, then it's a color that's all about trash management and manipulation to try to fill up your trash as much as you possibly can to basically utilize it as a secondary resource, similar to how yellow is using its security as a secondary resource at times. Then black is a pretty interesting color where its control tools are de-digivolution and deletion via cost, so it's trying to shrink and reduce the opponent's Digimon to put them in range of their deletion abilities. And then on top of that, black is actually kind of doing a lot and is more archetypical than various other colors, so it doesn't have as many generic tech and tools, but when it does get an archetype and when that archetype is supported, it's usually relatively strong. And depending on the archetype, it does do and behave in various different ways. And finding what color works for you is usually going to be one of the hardest things that you could do, which is why I recommended a couple of things just to start things out. In terms of what I think the easier colors to play are, I think red and black are two of the easiest colors to get a solid understanding on the foundations of the game with, and then I would probably extend and expand into various different colors depending on what your general interest is and how you generally like to play the game. And as far as some closing pieces of advice, I definitely would take into consideration the concept of looking ahead to see what's coming down the pipeline in terms of the spoilers in future sets from Japan, to be able to figure out what you want to get and put yourself in line with what you're trying to achieve out of the game. On top of that, I would also 100% read the rulebook and read it thoroughly, so that way you have a solid understanding of the base rules of the game, and watch some gameplay or actually play the game and have a tutor to be able to help teach you the game and the different types of cards and concepts that you're wanting to learn and play with. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.